Hello, I'm Jason Wynn. I'm going to be talking to you today about AI in meeting rooms, in particular, the interpreter agent. So, go through today talking about interpreter in meetings and what it is and how does it work, around how does it do that real time processing, go through best practices, and lastly, we'll finish off with prerequisites and licensing requirements to utilize the interpreter agent itself. First things first is understanding what is the interpreter agent. So it allows us to utilize a wide array of technologies within Microsoft that bring together the ability to remove those language barriers. When we're working with teams across different geographically dispersed locations to utilize seamlessly their own native language. And what it allows us to do is to invest in the interpreter agent to help participants speak and listen in their preferred languages through real time speech and speech interpretation. So, if I want to think about how this actually applies to and where this can actually start to become useful, let's look at how it could be used as part of a meeting. So, we now have the ability to be told when we're interpreting and when we're trying to make things available to it. So when somebody speaks in their language, other than their own preferred language, you'll hear the translation of the original speaker, and you'll also see an indicator on the original speaker that the feed shows their speech is being translated. So if I speak in my native tongue, which is English, but I want people to be able to understand it in other languages or want to be able to be understood, I can have the ability to do that. But more importantly, it tells people that I am interpreting. The reason for this is that the AI behind it is getting to such a good state that it's hard to differentiate whether or not I'm speaking in my own language or if I'm then having it interpreted on your behalf for you. Likewise, I now have the ability to be understood whether or not it's being interpreted for others. People have the ability to look at the conversation and to see that I might be able to understand English well, but what if I want to hear Jason speaking in German instead? And that's what it allows me to do as a receiver of this. I can then hear that speech translated in their own chosen language. And an indicator showed on the video feed that shows that that speech is being translated for others. Additionally, after you've finished speaking and have been listened to interpret others, others can then go and listen to what their preferred languages are, or they can find out what the indications are if they want to have it till everybody's finished listening or speaking. But there's quite a few languages that we have the ability to translate this into. We now have the ability to take it from English or Spanish, Portuguese, that's either Brazilian or native Portuguese. Again, Japanese simplifies Chinese, Italian, German, Korean, and French. So we have the ability to bring all these languages into it. Now, these are only the ones that are certified by Microsoft right now that allows us to do it. But some languages can be recognized by interpreter, but that we cannot yet validate and guarantee what the accuracy is for those languages. And regardless of what the input language is, the interpretations and the output will always be one of the supported languages that we see from here. So how does it work? How does Microsoft take the ability of taking somebody's native language and then translate it into something completely different? We utilize something called real-time processing. So this real-time processing allows us to take that interpreter agent that's within Teams itself and then enables us to have that speech to speech. We call it STS translations using within Azure AI services. It automatically detects the spoken language in a meeting and then allows us to have that multi-speaker support, multilingual conversation. So how it works is the speech recognition. It converts that spoken language into English text. The translation then allows us to translate the English text into our selected languages, so that translation service is called MT. Now, voice generation, which is called TTS, is produced by translated that speech in that speech language in our target language, and it can simulate the speaker's voice. It uses a predefined voice base and then allows us to have a preference of what we want it to apply to. And then ultimately what happens is a bot transmits that meeting audio for cloud-based processing and returns it transaction seamlessly and instantly to that meeting itself. So when we're utilizing this and when we're using it, only the original audio streams are analyzed within that. Again, that active speech, what we're trying to do is instantly provide that Azure Communication Services allows us to go and bring all the information to that one spot. And lastly, there's none of those voice samples are capped. They're not retained. The instantly transient information allows us to have that brought through. The good thing about this, though, is that that meaning is being able to be translated, transcribed, and brought into somebody else's native language. And what I find the most interesting is that it doesn't have to be a robotic voice. It could be your own voice. So as I'm speaking in English, you hear my voice and the way I speak and how I speak being broadcast to you in whatever your native language is. So what type of devices can I run this from? What's the supported ecosystem? And so what we can look at right now is we can start utilizing the desktop, whether it's Windows or Mac. I could do it from a mobile phone, whether it's Android or an Apple device. Again, I could be using a web client. I could be using Chrome, Edge, or Safari, or even Firefox to be able to do this. We need to do it from a scheduled meeting. We need to be able to do it so that way that it was able to have the ability to set up those components that we need to on the back end first. Likewise, I could use it from channel meetings if I'm working from a group within Teams itself and I want to be able to quickly spin up a meeting where we have people that are geographically dispersed to be able to understand me, to have that conversation I can do. And likewise, with the ability to do it from VDI, whether that's any supported Microsoft VDI infrastructure that allows us to utilize Microsoft Teams within it. But there's things that aren't supported. There's areas outside of this that we haven't yet captured, we haven't yet navigated to. And these areas are really around unscheduled one-to-one calls. There could be voice VoIP over IP calls. It could be PSTN switching. So PSTN calls, we cannot yet do that real-time transcription and add that interpreter agent to those calls. Likewise, we need to be able to have those meetings scheduled using Microsoft Teams rooms or personal devices. Can't utilize it over town halls yet or webinars, or even utilizing the Microsoft free version of Microsoft Teams. But there's other areas that we need to think about. How do I get the most out of it? How do I ensure that if we're a multinational organization that we're all able to get the most out of that meeting, to get the most out of what's being said and by whom? That's why we need to follow best practices. So we need to understand when to use interpreter. So when we're using interpreter, we need to understand that we may not have that common language. We may be different people and different understandings and different comprehensive of what my language is isn't necessarily the same as what others have. And again, in structured discussions and where we're at the beginning of that structured conversation where one person is speaking and one person is speaking at a time is a great place. If I'm conveying this information to you right now in English, but you need to be able to understand it in your native language, then it's a great time to be able to have that broadcast of information, to be able to apply that through to me so that way I can see how and what I can do within that tool itself. Some effective tips to think about as well within Microsoft Interpreter and how we bring these things together is having that multilingual communication. So stick to one language. Stick to something consistently, a single language, especially if we're bilingual. It's really difficult for an interpreter to understand where one language I may speak English at the beginning and Spanish at the end. Stick to one language, and so the interpreter can bring those things together for us. Be concise of what we're doing and how we're utilizing it. Use short sentences and pause frequently. Allow the other language to potentially catch up. If I'm speaking very rapidly and Spanish is my native language, I can convey a lot of information much quicker than other languages and other dialects may be able to simplify that and give it a moment to catch up and be able to pause. And simplify technical language and improve the interpretation accuracy. Keeping things simple, keeping the information going to allow it to be able to catch up, to understand what it is you're actually trying to convey as part of that conversation. Raise your hand. use the hand raise button in your meeting, and that controls whether we indicate where we want to speak or prevent overlapping speech, stopping people from talking over you and preventing that from occurring. It allows it to utilize just that one voice at that point in time. And allow the interpretation to finish. Whilst we're speaking, whilst it's going, we want to be able to ensure that everybody gets that full message of what we're trying to say. And look out for visual indicators that have finished or interpreting and then nodding of what's going on, and people are getting the information that needs to have happen. And support those messages visually, so sharing your screen and using chat features to provide that additional context of what's actually being said. And turn on your camera, because visual cues are about creating a more engaging and more multilingual conversation of what's being said. But there's that part of the communication, but what about actually setting this information up? How do we make sure that we have all these recommendations? So ensure that that organizer of the meeting has the Copilot or Microsoft Teams Premium license to turn on that multilingual speech recognition inside the meetings, so people can allow them to go and join that information onto it. It allows us to have that live captions for that clear communication without interpreter. And easily catch up on those key discussions through Intelligent Recap, because we now support multilingual meetings. After the meeting, your recap is automatically generated in the translation of the language that you've selected as part of your live captions and transcription of what we're trying to achieve. But we have some limitations with Interpreter, and it's worthwhile calling these out as well. So as part of the limitations that we have, that meeting audio can only capture what's original meaning. We can't include any of the interpreted audio. So as me recording, you have my original, but you don't have my translated, interpreted video audio that could be part of that meeting. And that transcription audio is only available in live during the meeting, and after the meeting end, only original spoken language is part of it. Again, Interpreter isn't optimized for meetings with rapid exchanges, in interruptions, or overlapping dialogue. It likes to know what that native language is that you're working on and be able to convey that information, and it won't necessarily be able to pick up from one language to the next language to the next. And then whilst Azure is processing that information and processing my voice to be able to give you the interpretation of what's being said, jumping from one person to the next, or being able to have multiple people speaking multiple languages, it doesn't provide the best level of experience just yet. Again, interpretation of people's names or genders or technical terms may be inaccurate. The world of languages is very, very difficult, and being able to convert those idiosyncrasies into things, to be able to translate that into a seamless way that may not be absolutely perfect. But we have some prerequisites and some things to think about before we even enable the interpreter agent. And these things could be simple things like the licensing requirements. So again, we need to have somewhere between the supported version of Microsoft 365. So that base license could be anywhere from Microsoft 365 Basic to all the way up to an E5. We need to enable that Microsoft Teams license if we haven't got that natively within it. And likewise, we need to either have a Copilot or a Teams Premium license to be able to do it. Now that gives us 20 hours of interpretation that's included within it. And so by having those licenses applied to it, we're going to access that across beyond those hours, including the subject to what's available and the capacity that's within Microsoft. We have other things to think about as well. What do we need to do around the technical readiness of the tenant? So Interpreter should be on by default. However, I have gone to customers and I have seen that it's not enabled by default. So we do that through the Teams PowerShell component. And within that, we set Teams meeting policy, give it the identity name, so it could be global, and then AI interpreter, and we either set it to it enabled or disabled. So again, we want to validate whether or not it's that device that allows us to see what's going on and that we have that functionality enabled for a tenant. But again, there may be times when we need to think about disabling it, or if there's part of our organization doesn't want us to allow it, in which case we would set these to disabled. Again, those policies to allow the interpreter to happen, as well as the voice simulation in interpreter should be enabled or disabled. So that allows me to simulate my own voice over so you can grab and understand what I'm saying in something that sounds a bit more realistic and more like me. So how do I configure it? And once this has been enabled in Tenant, how do I enable this functionality to occur? So the interpreter in Teams, we go within it. So within the client ourselves, and we click the ellipses button, and then we see the language and speech, and we turn on interpreter. So this will allow us to grab that information to decide who and what language we want to be able to see it from. So we choose from that drop-down menu. So what is our the interpreter languages? Where do we want to be applied? What's the language that we want to choose? So that way we can have our language in our native voice. Within that as well, we have what the functionality is. So we can change those interpreter settings. We can choose which user, which voice, what subject, what licenses we want to apply to that. And then that then dictates what agents we have involved to it. So by default, we simulate my voice. But there may be times that I don't want to simulate my voice. What if I want to utilize one of the other voices that are part of it? So we could then use either Ava or Andrew or the Fable Turbo to be able to bring that voices into it that allows us to utilize those voices, because we have something that we call the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is when my voice sound, and if it's just a little bit not quite right, we suffer from something called the uncanny valley, that you actually take a dislike towards that trying to be too much human or too close to human. By utilizing a different voice, a different voiceover for it, we can seamlessly get to it, so that way we understand that that's actually not Jason speaking, but it's a voice replicating what Jason should be. Likewise, after that, all the other participants, and they're informed that somebody is using it, and also participants with the interpreter agents also will be marked with that symbol. So again, we can see what's happening within it. We can see how things are portraying out. We get a good understanding of how that voice and how that attribution is being recorded and how it's being applied to it. And at the end of it, we can easily see when that voice is being interpreted for us and the voice is coming through loud and clear with that interpreter agent being applied to it. So I hope that finds it useful for you, bringing AI into our workplace, allowing it to interpret those conversations by reducing whether or not we're speaking German or Korean or Japanese or English. Everybody is working now together using our common language that is our own native language. Thank you.